and welcome to Fair Talk by Fair Farms. My name is Amanda Higgins. Today I'm most excited to be joined by a wonderful guest, a Tasmanian producer, a respected policy expert and an advocultural advocate, the Chair of FarmSafe Australia, Felicity Richards. Felicity, welcome. Thanks so much
Amanda.
for joining us.
It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. Felicity, to kick things off, I'd like to share some really sobering statistics, ones which you know all too well. In 2023, we had a historic low of 32 farm fatalities. But in 2024, that figure more than doubled, 72 lives lost, the highest number in more than 2 decades. And since 2020, close to 300 fatalities have been recorded on Australian farms. As someone working on the ground and at a policy level, how do these figures resonate with you?
They're just tragic numbers. There's really no other way to put it. And they remind me that we have such a job ahead of us because we want to see those numbers change and not just the occasional dip. We want to see them calm down and stay down.
Yeah, they're horrible numbers to think. Lives lost unnecessarily.
Absolutely. And the number of serious incidents similarly remains stubbornly high, and we really want to impact that number as well.
These numbers are heartbreaking, and as you've so often pointed out, many of these tragedies are preceded by a near miss, a close call where people simply got lucky, and that's exactly what this year's National Farm Safety Week campaign is all about. This week, Farm Safety launched the campaign under the theme of Second Chances. Who knows how many more you will get. Can you tell us a little bit about how the theme came about and why the focus on near misses seems so timely?
I think this campaign, Second Chances, and I'm going to give all credit for this to our amazing Executive Officer, Stevie Howdell, because this campaign arose from us reflecting on the tragic numbers from 2024 and saying we not only want to mourn that loss of life, but we want to say, okay, we've got a second chance. We can do better. How are we going to do that? And from that then grew this notion that how many of us who are now walking around on farms today have had our own moment that could have ended up being at best a little bit frightening, maybe a graze, maybe a bruise, at worst a serious injury or a fatality. So how do we craft a campaign that says to all of us, let's reflect on those near misses, the second chance we've been given, and turn it into a safety message of doing things differently?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think having had a look at some of the media, it goes to show how we can very much humanise those everyday moments, because I'm sure every farmer out there has
Absolutely,
had
they do.
You know, we can laugh about it, but at the end of the day, you think to yourself, my God, I'm really lucky. And, you know, we need to share stories about what that looks like. And that really seems to be the crux of what this is all about, isn't it? Is the power of storytelling.
It's absolutely focused on storytelling. So our Safer Farms report is peppered with stories that farmers have really generously shared with us about their own near misses and what they have drawn from those. And they also share what it was about that moment that made them stop and think, wow, you know, that was so close. And what am I going to do differently in future to protect myself from that happening again and to protect the people around me from it happening again? So stories are powerful. We're leaning into those stories and we're asking that others do the same.
Yeah. The campaign breaks the week across into 7 different topics. We might just touch on them if we can.
That'd be great.
Because I think it was really important that it's structured this way, because every one of them has a different message slightly. So the themes briefly, and they are punchy and they're hard hitting and they need to be, is that every near miss has a lesson. Let's not miss it. The second is dead tired, the cost of pushing through. And I know that you've been calling for a cultural change on fatigue for some time. Respect the routine and challenge the habit. And this one speaks to complacency, I suppose. It's a very dangerous habit to have in ag. Not just a bad day, addressing mental health and toll of burnout. And then it only takes a second, especially relevant for parents on farm. Can you hear me? A reminder that poor communication can hold real risks. And the clock is ticking, tackling the pressure cooker effect of rushing without planning. Which of these daily themes really resonates with you? Because I know you and I have shared a couple of stories, and I know that you can relate to all of them, but which of them actually really hits the mark for you?
So for me, the one that is it's the one that really hits me because of it being so close to my own near miss is around the child safety conversation, and it's the only taking a second. And even just thinking that, I get that little tightening in your body where you think, oh yeah, that's the one for me. But we all have them, and we all have them on different days. Some days it's fatigue, some days it's pressure. But for me, the child safety one is always gives me a moment.
Yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because there is a lesson in every single one of those stories. I think the important thing is, how do we share them, and why should we share them?
When we share, and I want to make the point here that when we talk about sharing our stories, people need to take control of that and think about what it means for them. So if you've got a really distressing story, it's quite okay if that just means sitting down with a cup of tea, reflecting quietly, privately to yourself about what happened or nearly happened and what you might need to do differently. If you feel that it's okay with you to do so, sharing with your team, your family member, even sharing with your community, jumping on social media if that's your gig, is fantastic. But whatever it is, it's taking that reflection and thinking about what you're going to do differently in future. So one of the stories for me, which is my story about the near miss with my daughter, really gave me pause for thought and reflecting on what do I need to do differently.
Yeah. Are you happy to share it?
I am happy to share that story. So it's a story which, it's definitely not my Mother of the Year story, but I do feel when I do share it that people get the sense that we're all in this together. So as you know, I have 3 young children. They're now 5, 7 and 9. But at the time, I only had my 2 daughters, and they were 4 and 2. And I was brushing my horse. And I think you mentioned you're familiar with horses. So my focus is all on, we're having this lovely little moment with the girls, and I just need to make sure that they're safe around the horse. They already know, even the 2-year-old knows you don't walk behind the horse, you come up to the shoulder. So I've got the hay there, and we're having this, picture perfect farming moment, mother and children.
Farm life, how beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it was totally Facebook worthy.
Yep.
And then my 4-year-old turns to me and says, Mum, Esme's in the trough. And I looked, and I think 5 metres, not much more than the distance between you and I now. Little Esme had leant forward, and I wonder if she was reaching, it was an above ground water trough, stock trough, and she was maybe reaching for the float, the float sitting in the trough, and her little legs had come off the ground and her hands are too long to touch the bottom. And there's not a sound. Like, I hadn't heard her. I was brushing my horse. I didn't have headphones in. I was probably chatting with them, but it just didn't occur to me. A few things didn't occur to me. One, I hadn't even looked at the water. I think I was so blind to that because I was just thinking about the horse. And I think, interestingly, it leads into one of the other themes, the complacency one that you highlighted, because I've brushed horses 100, if not 1,000 times. And my focus is on, well, don't get kicked, don't get stepped on. But that made me completely blind to another very real danger that was very close to me that maybe someone else would have spotted in a second.
But at the same time, you probably would have thought, oh, good, the horse has got water.
Yeah, exactly.
Just automatically.
You're just in a different zone. And the other lesson to me in this, and I should actually, for anyone who's thinking, oh my goodness, I pulled my daughter straight out. Nothing more than a couple of coughs, a huge cuddle, and rushing inside to get her warmed up was the extent of the damage, I'm incredibly glad to say. But it also gave me that moment that I would have told you then that I was supervising my children. And we have this conversation a lot at FarmSafe, where it's easy to think you're supervising your child, but what active supervision means is not just within arm's reach. It means within your scope of attention.
Yeah.
And choosing tasks that you can do and still have sufficient attention on your child is very different from choosing ones where a child could be trailing around behind you and be physically present.
I think
so. It's a big story.
I think the other day you called it active supervision.
Yeah, active supervision.
Active
it's such a
supervision.
good description, isn't it? Because it is active. You can't passively supervise a 2-year-old around water.
No, because then it's not supervision, is it?
It's not supervision at all.
And it's one of those things, you felt that you were in an area, you'd done a risk assessment. The girls weren't behind the horse, they were in front of the horse. You'd had the chat with them. There was some food there. There was an activity that was going on, but it was a blink of an eye.
And so we talk about shame, we talk about fear of recrimination. It's made me acutely aware that my husband and I, with our very small team on our beef farm, if you can create a space where you can share your stories, hopefully it means your team's empowered to do the same thing. Because it is big to share those moments where you're embarrassed or really deeply ashamed. You feel like you let someone down or you did something stupid, you know. Sometimes our near misses are frankly hilarious because they're just that real moment where you think, wow, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
But you do have to try your hardest, I think, as managers to step up and let your team know that it's okay to share those moments.
Yeah, and I think the Australian way is to kind of laugh it off or she'll be right, mate, or geez, wasn't I lucky kind of stuff. But really there's much more to the narrative than that. And I think that's been reflected in the Safer Farms report, that this is really about moving the needle, turning the dial, changing the narrative around it. So the sharing actually is the lesson of what not to do, because it could have ended up entirely differently.
Yeah, it could probably have ended up without me sitting here with you today. And as you say, not all stories are like that, and sometimes they are funny, just in the ridiculousness of the situations we find ourselves in on the farm, and that's okay too.
That's right.
They
always said don't walk with animals and kids, right?
Yeah, exactly. My dad likes to say, kids and dogs, who'd have them?
Yep.
And I really understand that now. I've got kids of my own. But yeah, you can have a chuckle. There's nothing wrong with that. The way you share with your team is totally personal. What we ask is that you are sensitive to others and that you say, what am I going to do with this information? Yeah. Just don't let it end with the laugh. Take it the next step and say, okay, now what are we going to do to make sure that that particular thing doesn't happen again?
Yeah, that's right. It's about changing that culture, having the leadership to have that conversation to change the culture, because it might just be that genuine conversation that you have with the rest of your team that actually then does end up making it not reactive but being proactive in future, that can make all the difference. So you and your husband run a beef farm in Tasmania and you've got a small tight-knit team. What is it that you have implemented personally on farm that's worked for you?
Well, it certainly hasn't worked from the get-go.
Okay.
So, but I quite like talking about that, because I think sometimes people think, farm safety, there's lots of myths out there I hear, like, oh, it's easy if you're a corporate, or, you've got a background in HR, so obviously you'd be nailing it, that kind of thing. Not that I do have a background in HR. But on our farm, my husband and I, it started with, I think, I became the safety police. And that is not a fun job. And I would strongly encourage anyone who immediately it jumps into their mind, yeah, I know that person on the farm. Are they enjoying that role? Is that potentially really just putting all the responsibility onto one person?
It's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of responsibility.
You're the fun police too,
right? Totally the fun police. Nobody wants to be the fun police.
Yeah.
And it also, I think, quite inadvertently can really disempower other members of the team to be proactive in their own safety. And that's a real shame as well. That's a lost opportunity. So on our farm, I'm happy to say that we sort of took this quite ad hoc approach, and I would occasionally lose my temper and get crabby about something. But then again, I'm not the operations manager, so I also sometimes didn't have the insights into the way the farm was operating to really make a good call about what was a safe practice and what wasn't. So we go through this mess, and eventually my husband said, I think we should ask in a man called Phil John, who is a former workplace inspector in Tasmania, who's now since retired from that job and very kindly came on as an independent consultant to do some work with us. And Phil has been a lifesaver because he brought in these fresh eyes. He took the burden off Mark and I, and off me in particular, to be the safety police. And he empowered everyone. So as you said, we've only got a small team. We have 3 casuals working with us on one property. We have 2 permanent staff on another site. We have quite a few contractors who come through and work with us. And Phil started with a big conversation with Mark and I about what our concerns were, and he identified what he thought were some of the biggest risks in our farm. So obviously cattle handling is a big one, but we also do a fair amount of work with tractors. And so he was like, okay, here's a few critical things we want to get a safe work procedure in place straight away.
Yeah. But you would have had some documentation.
We did have.
As the chair of Farm Safe Australia, no doubt you would have had bucket loads.
Yeah, we did, but it just still felt piecey, and it felt like people were doing it because I was dragging them to it, not because they thought it was important.
Buy-in.
Yeah. And every time I tried to have a meeting, there was always something more important. Phil comes in, talks us through, has a look at the documentation I already had, actually does some pruning back, and is like, Felicity, it's okay to keep it really short and simple. What we need is the heart of the issue. We don't need a big narrative around it. Then he reinducted us, and he did that from the top down. He was like, right, Felicity and Mark, you're being reinducted into your own business as well. That was really powerful. He has followed that with an audit, and he actually went all over our farm, accompanied by various staff members, which gave them an opportunity to have a really candid conversation about things that were maybe bugging them and that they needed to perhaps voice to someone who was a little bit away from Mark and I, and Phil could then report back to us.
It's always hard, isn't it, when you're married to the other?
It is. I mean, to come to me and say, oh, by the way, the boss is being annoying, well, actually, that's my husband, or vice versa, is a bit awkward, whereas Phil gave them that safe space to talk to a third person. We've now got our list from Phil, and we've gone through with him and prioritised them and talked about mitigating strategies, and we're trying to work through that, and we're going to be inviting him back on a 6-monthly basis to say, okay, please come over the farm and give us that audit kind of lens so that it keeps us really accountable and on top of emerging risks.
Yeah, I think that brings it really very much down to earth, isn't it? It's not just about ticking a box on a piece of paper. It's really very much about protecting your people. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what we do want to do, is the crux of safety, is to protect people. So from what you've learnt about the campaign and what our viewers need to try and understand, is that the power is in the storytelling and that there is a safe space to do that. Are there any stories that you think, or any places and spaces that's a more ideal time to share those stories?
I think you definitely want to hold on to your story and reflect on it in a moment. As much as we can as employers, I think it's good to try and get people to report as quickly as possible. But I'm conscious that you want to do that being aware that it may bring up genuine trauma for people, and they might need some support around them. So you've got to put a few things in place. I think you do want a workplace culture, indeed a farm culture, because sometimes near misses happen to family members and visitors. You want a farm culture that says, I can speak up as and when it happens.
Yeah, not afraid.
Not afraid. Not afraid. And I know that I will be listened to. I won't be shamed or judged for what happened. But I also know that I'll be empowered to be part of what the solution might be. So if it means there needs to be a fence somewhere or a sign somewhere or a bit of terrain that we say, actually, we're not going to drive there anymore. That was a bad call. We shouldn't have let the ute go onto that particular bit of the bank. We're just going to say that's out. So you empower people to be part of those solutions. But to address that risk of where things got seriously hairy or we simply don't know someone else's mental state and how they might feel, it's also, there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of support resources out there for people, and it might be that you need to make those available for your team as well and say, hey guys, if you need something else, something a bit more to support you through this, there are resources. We can create the time and point you in the direction of some professional support that'll help you with this. So it's a whole bunch of different things you can put in place, but all of them are actually really simple.
Is the first and the most practical making sure that it's okay to have that conversation?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yep.
If you don't have the groundwork right, and someone feels like they're going to get into trouble, they're never going to come forth, are they? And you don't know what that then brings. So the first piece really is making sure that it's a safe space.
Yep. Everything flows from that, 100%.
Yeah, it does. Felicity, you mentioned something earlier about, you know, we've said, a staff member doesn't want to mention it because they're going to be fearful about getting into trouble, or they're going to feel like an idiot, or someone's going to make fun of them. But particularly in the instance where it's the owner that's made the mistake, often there can be a sense of shame around, particularly when it's a really genuine scare. How do we move through those feelings and emotions of vulnerability and shame when it comes to that?
What I think is really empowering in this time is that this conversation is happening across so many different industries. And so I think as agriculture, we often hold ourselves apart and say we're different. And in some ways, we totally are. We are different in the best possible ways. Really cool. But it doesn't mean we can't reach out to other places that are looking at vulnerability and looking at crafting cultures that encourage sharing safely and learning from those experiences. And I think we can do that. It probably often does start, if you're the owner or the manager, with finding that courage in yourself, as you say. Because unfortunately, while you might be the one who's feeling particularly confronted by your own stuff up, you finding the courage to share that is so meaningful for your new or particularly younger staff. Because once you do it, if the boss can do it, and you know that saying, the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. This is kind of like the standard you're prepared to lay out there for others to look at, is the standard that they will feel safe with as well. So it's a big job, and you take it on your own pace. Yeah, exactly.
It's a big responsibility because I think at the end of the day, we don't intentionally go out to cause damage to ourselves or damage to others. It's because there's a pressure, or because there's a tiredness, or because of a time constraint, or perhaps it's because we're complacent, because it's the way we've always done it, instead of looking at things with a set of fresh eyes. And we spoke the other day about perhaps maybe dragging the newest person on farm with you.
Such a good idea.
You just don't, there are risks that you just are blind to every day.
Yeah, you can easily sort of find yourself thinking, I know this place like the back of my hand, and you do, but sometimes you miss something that is standing out to your new person, and they're thinking, gee, that's, it's a bit weird, a bit off. And if we don't create the environment for them to say, why is that, why is that gate still,
Yeah, should it be like that?
Yeah, should it be like that, And the other thing I think we have a bit of a tendency to do is I do think it's letting ourselves off the hook when we tell ourselves, well, the pressure was so great, I had to do it that way, or, I had to push through. And it's
a badge of honour.
Yeah, we do.
Which is really bad.
Yeah,
we are bad for that.
And we're bad for I think, letting ourselves treat that as a badge of honour and refusing to maybe look a little more closely and say, we did have choices there. We did have choices, and if we really examine our decision there, perhaps there were choices that we refused to create and act on. So it's hard going, and all I would just say to people is you're not alone. We're all doing it, and probably, you know, we're all stuffing it up and having to pick ourselves up and say, oh, whoops, I'm going to try again. But if we do it together, and agriculture, we are good at doing stuff together. We are good at rallying round. And so if this is a cultural change that we need to rally round, let's do it.
That's right. And it's not just a one-off message. This is an ongoing message that we need to keep reminding each other of as well, because we certainly don't want to see statistics like what we did back in 2024.
No.
Those numbers have got to come down. It's time to shift the needle.
100%.
Yeah. Because you said it best, Felicity, the difference between that was close and that was fatal can come down to one moment, one decision. To our viewers, this is a national call to action. If you've had a near miss, don't just move on. Talk about it, learn from it, share it, protect your team and protect your family. Felicity, there are some great resources out there, like you had said earlier. The Safer Farms Report 2025 is pretty amazing. It's got heartfelt stories all of the way through it. From that perspective, I'd like to say it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Fair Talk. Thank you for your leadership, sharing your experiences and committing a safer farm for Australian farmers. And to thank you to everyone who's tuned in today. We look forward to having you back, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the next episode of Fair Talk by Fair Farms. Until then, bye for now, and stay safe.